Now, before we go into the meat of our Laps Around Dalaran podcast, I did want to talk about a little announcement. We're going to be going to Gamescom for the first time ever, which is going to be really fucking cool. I've never even been to Germany before, let alone Gamescom. I think the only other convention that me and you have ever been to, like a big gaming convention, is like BlizzCon.
Yeah, pretty much.
And we've only been there once either, so it's going to be a bit of a first for us. It's going to be awesome, and we are actually going to be streaming there from the 17th to the 21st around the Blizzard booth area for roughly around 4 hours a day or so. It might be a little bit longer depending on what we're doing, and we have got some interesting ideas of what we want to stream. They're going to be a little bit more different streams than what we usually do, so if you aren't going to Gamescom, hopefully you can at least tune into our Twitch stream for that time, because they should be very fucking funny. Let's just say Demon Hunters are out, and I've got some interesting ideas about what you can do with 40 of them. So yeah, it should be a load of fun. And of course, if you are going to Gamescom, make sure you do come over and say hello. Maybe not while we're streaming, because we're probably pissing about chat and stuff. But if you ever see us out and about, then make sure you come over, say hello. We're also going to be at the Legion Caf quite a lot of the time, which sounds really interesting. It's like some sort of bar cafe thing, like related around Legion.
Yeah, it looks very exciting.
That is going to be so cool. So yeah, if you are going to Gamescom, make sure you come say hi. It'll be fucking awesome to talk to you a lot. And if you can't come, unfortunately, then make sure you at least do tune into the stream and hopefully join in some odd Demon Hunter action. It should be a load of fun.
But anyway, let's get into the bread and butter of this video. What are we talking about this week?
I wanted to talk about raiding, strangely enough. Mainly I wanted to talk about raid difficulties, so the flexible modes as well as Mythic. Because we've had these systems now for a full expansion, and like at the beginning of the expansion when it was first introduced, like right towards the end of Siege of Orgrimmar, when they like fully implemented the full system, we was umming and ahhing about it a little bit, thinking about the pros and the cons, especially with the new Mythic mode. And considering we're going into Legion and like nothing is changing, I thought now would be a really good time to like give it a review.
I mean, it's quite interesting because typically when they do go into a new expansion, they usually change something. But you are right, going into Legion, they're changing nothing at all. Everything's remaining exactly the same in terms of like how the raid system works. Well, before getting into the Mythic stuff, because I guess that's where we have the strongest opinions, let's jump into the flex mode. So I think we can both agree the flex mode is incredibly successful.
Yeah, they did a really good job. There's like very few downsides to the flex mode, because even people who wanted to only ever do 10-man when this new system came out, or only ever wanted to do 25-man, you can still do that if you want to, but now it's just so much more accessible for everyone else. Like, it's perfect for guilds. So say that one of your members doesn't turn up. It's just like, oh, well, we'll just continue on without them. Or one of your people, or maybe you, have to leave 2 hours into the raid when the raid normally lasts 5 hours. You normally ain't going to screw anyone over. Maybe if you're a key member like a tank or like maybe a disc priest, not anymore, but when disc priests were good, you'd probably still screw people over a little bit, but you can normally get around it. Someone go into an off-spec or something, you can normally do a normal and heroic. It's a little bit more forgiving. So yeah, this system just allows so many more people to actually play. It's also great for
pugs.
Oh, it's so good for pugs.
Yeah.
Because of course, like beforehand, you had to try and get 10 random people to stay in the group, or 25 random people to stay in the group. If anyone left,
it just like, the whole thing grinds to a halt.
Exactly, and you have to stop, you have to go to trade chat, or ask people to look through their guilds or their friends list just to try and get people in, just so you can continue playing. Whereas now it's like, oh well, our DPS left, whatever, we'll just keep playing.
And of course, the reason why it is so accessible in that particular situation is because it all scales.
Yeah, it just scales between 10, 30 people. It's just, it's perfect.
But the issue is also that it scales. And to sort of explain that is that there is always a magic number, and they always try and smooth it out, but they never seem to do it perfectly. And a great example of this is like Blackhand. Remember Blackhand on Heroic first week?
I do, yeah.
If you went to Blackhand with, say, 21 people, I think that was like the benchmark, 21 people or more, the guys downstairs in phase 2, on the balconies even, they do like double damage. The boss would have an absolutely absurd amount of health. And as soon as you drop to 20 or lower, then suddenly the fight was a joke. But more than 20, it was like almost impossible to kill, especially if you're doing split runs, which really sucked. Well, at least for the people that were trying to do split runs on it.
Of course, that is definitely a problem.
That's an extreme example.
Yeah.
But typically, it's the other way around. Usually, the less people you have in your raid, the more difficult it is. And an example of this is Hellfire Citadel. If you try and do Iskar or Soccerfire with, say, 10, 11, or even 12 people, it feels far more difficult than if you was to, say, have 25 people or 30 people.
Yeah.
It seems like the more people you have, the easier it is.
Generally speaking, though, I'm pretty sure that those things aren't particularly intended. Maybe not to the scale, definitely not to the scale of Blackhand, which, of course, was hotfixed so very quickly. I'm pretty sure it's not intended, and it's kind of it's just a byproduct. It's just something that, like, they can't do it perfectly. They do their best to make it so whether or not you have 10 players or 30 players, you get a similar experience in terms of difficulty. I don't think you'd ever be able to make it perfect. That's probably impossible.
And I think that's the reason why there isn't a flexible mode in the hardest difficulty in the game.
Oh, no, definitely
because
not.
then people would deliberately go out there, even more than what they do already with heroics, to find the perfect number of people so, they can actually get it done as easy as they can.
Well, yeah, like, imagine with Archimond, if you brought 17 people, you might be able to do phase 1 before, like, X amount of Doomfire spawn. You might be able to skip a whole Doomfire, and you're just like, that's a massive deal. Whereas, of course, on Heroic, those things probably are still the case, where you might be able to do it slightly quicker if you drop a healer or whatever. But
it's not necessary.
It's not necessary because you don't have to be so cookie cutter and, like, clean about everything that you do.
Unless it's Blackhand.
Black Hand when it first came out. Fair enough. But generally with the scaling, I think they've done at least an acceptable job. I don't think it's been like.
I don't think it's a
absurd or
massive issue.
I don't think it's really much. I don't hear many complaints about it.
All I think is that it'd be nicer for 10-man guilds, for people that raid in smaller numbers, because I think they sort of get in the harsh end of the stick. Because if you have a large group, it just feels so much easier. And I don't understand why.
Well, it could be, and I'm not sure if this is true. It's just an idea, and I don't even think it's right, but it's an idea. What if, like the old argument was that 25-man was harder than 10-man, even if the bosses were the same sort of difficulty, 25-man was always harder than 10-man because you had 15 more people that could, like, fuck up and, like, die.
Okay.
What if they made it so on the, like, higher end, so when you have more and more players, the bosses, like, don't scale as efficiently? Does that make sense? So instead of them getting 10% more damage, as an example, per 5 players, maybe it will go up, like, I don't know, 6% or something. It, like, slows down a little bit towards the top end, because, like, to kind of help you out, maybe? I'm pretty sure this is bullshit. But what if they're doing it? What if it's like some sort of conspiracy, Fuck over the 10-man guilds. They always screwed us over. ICC giving us worse item level, the bastards. I'll never forgive you. Pretty sure that's not
I'm almost certain that's not the case, but it's an interesting thought.
I don't know. I'll put my tin foil hat away now, I suppose. Yeah, you do get screwed over a little bit when you're in small guilds, but everything is doable. And honestly, when these things arise, when they're really bad, they are very few and far between, and they're normally hotfixed very quickly. You just need to, like, let Blizzard know, oi, by the way, when you do this boss with 14 people, it's fucking shit, but when you do it with 13 or 15, it's fine for some reason. Can you sort it? And they normally do. Yeah. They do listen to feedback in terms of the scaling. I'm not sure if they deliberately in-house literally do it with 10 players, then 11, then 12, all the way up to 30. I assume they do, right?
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
That sounds like a lot of fucking work, but I don't know. I'm not a game designer. I don't know what they do. But yeah. So apart from that, of course, I would say it is a minor problem with Flex. I think it's been an exceptionally great thing for the game.
Yeah, I think it'd be a big shame if they ever did change the system there is.
Unless they improved it somehow.
But right now, I mean, the only way I would improve it at least is just by making the scaling a little bit kinder to smaller groups.
Yeah, because another thing is as well, especially because of the introduction of the normal mode and how they're trying to make it more and more friends and family based.
Sure.
It really works with how Flex works, because say you have like a group of 15 of your friends and maybe a couple of your family members, and people aren't going to turn up. People have got to do things. They've got to go to dinners or whatever. They've got social lives. It doesn't matter if like your friend doesn't turn up. You just go down to 14 people. Or if your friend wants to bring their friend along, then you got 16 people. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's just so much more accessible, and it's really, really good.
But let's move over and talk about what initially, back in Siege of Ogama, when it was released and when it was announced that the last BlizzCon, actually no, the BlizzCon before
2014, I think it was,
something like that, yeah. Which is, of course, the Mythic mode. So when it was initially announced, it was sold to us. The reason why they were doing it, at least, was because it made scaling the game much, much easier when it came down to the bosses, as in tuning the bosses. Because how they would do it previously is that they would tune it for both 10 and 25 man, which inherently made the mass behind it and certain mechanics behind it very, very difficult in order to actually scale for both difficulties, and you'd always get one of them that was way easier than the other, and that's why you'd always get the arguments in trade chat.
Yeah.
10 man's easier than 25 man, or 25 man's easier than 10 man. By having this one difficulty, they could just tune the content for that one difficulty, and they'd never have any issues. And what you may have noticed is that throughout the whole of Warlords, pretty much none of the Mythic bosses changed at all in terms of like any hotfixes, exploits, bugs. There was basically no tuning issues whatsoever, apart from Archimond. Archimond did receive some changes, But again, that's a boss that was never tested on Mythic, at least.
Yeah, and that was kind of being hotfixed as the top-end guilds were doing
yeah.
it.
I mean, it's a fight that's supposed to be fucking difficult that probably didn't have that much internal testing or any internal testing on it whatsoever.
Well, it must have had
It must have had some, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I think, to be honest, the people that get there first, they're pretty much the testers.
Yeah, to
and
an
the fight
extent.
just changes as Blizzard keep applying hotfixes to it. So yeah, that is definitely one thing that they did say that you can see it pulled off. It did work.
Yeah, and as you said, the majority of them, like, regardless if you liked the bosses of this expansion or not.
Oh yeah, it's got nothing to do whether the bosses are good or bad.
Yeah, it's just
It's just how they work. It's the functionality.
Yeah, they function well. Like, they are killable when you first get to them. Their mechanics actually work
they don't
correctly.
change.
They
They're
very
not bugged
rarely
or anything like
change.
that.
Or they bug, or you can't really exploit them. Some, it may be mechanics like, maybe like Butcher, you might consider that an exploit. I mainly consider that as like cheese more than anything else. But
that's not a scaling problem.
yeah, that's not a scaling problem. Everything, when you got to it, felt proper, you know? Apart from maybe Blast Furnace. Of course, that was one of the few encounters of this expansion which was nerfed, but quite heavily after it was released.
Yeah, and that sort of brings me to the next point, because they kind of oversold this, where they said that Mythic, because in a Mythic you're definitely going to have 20 players, they can design encounters with class-specific mechanics in mind, because they expect every 20-man group to have at least one of each class, which I don't think is that unreasonable. How many classes are there? 11? I mean, there's 12 now with Demon Hunters coming. And in a 20-man group, yeah, you would expect the majority of serious Mythic guilds to at least have one of each class. So what they said is that they were going to use class-specific mechanics, or at least it allows them to do that. And that was like a selling point. We were actually brought by it. I remember us talking about it in the video that we initially made when Mythic came out. I think the video was titled Mythic, is it good or bad or something?
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. And we talked about all the social issues and all the complications that come with it and whatnot. And ultimately, we was like, this is one of the coolest things about it, that they can have class-specific mechanics. It's going to be really, really interesting. And they didn't use it at all, apart from on Blast Furnace with the mind controlling with Priest.
And it was a bit shit.
And it was shit.
Yeah.
Your mind controller's shitty mob, and all you do is spam one button over and over again. Mind control breaks, you kill the mob off, another mob spawns, you mind control that, and you just repeat the process. And that's the only thing that they decided to use for the entire expansion on Mythic across how many bosses? Like 30 bosses or something.
Yeah, probably even more than that. Yeah, it wasn't a very good, like, first showing of this new thing that we can do. But I don't think it was necessarily that the mind controlling aspect of it was wrong. I think the whole idea of mind controlling a mob is quite a cool idea. But only if the mob is interesting to control.
Yeah.
Like, it's
so, just in that instance they didn't execute it very well.
Very, very dull.
But
it's quite clever implementation, you know. It was like quite a clever thing to do, but it was just...
And it was integral to the fight. You
Yeah.
had to do it.
Yeah, but it was just very, very boring. But imagine if, like, the mob that you mind controlled was similar in terms of its complexity to something like Socrathar to control. That's another thing that we do control,
Yeah.
but it's not through mind control. And if you had to mind control Socrathar for some stupid reason, I don't think it would add anything to the fight, really. But it was, like, imagine if it was that fun to use. Imagine if the engineers could do that much stuff. I think being a priest on that fight would be much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Although, like, I'm not recommending you put Socrathar in Blast Furnace. That fight was fucked up enough. You don't want anything more than that. But you know what I mean? Like, the only reason that class-specific mechanic was so shit, in my opinion, was because the job was so boring and you had to do it for such a long time because the boss was so difficult. Because you had to repeat the boring
That's
job.
a fair point. But if I ask this question, though, what class-specific mechanics can you put in the game that aren't actually cheesy, boring, or frustrating? Because let's face it, if you get to an encounter and it's like, okay, you need a monk for this, you just have to have a monk because you need to use roll for some bizarre reason. Or you need to use transcendence. You have to have it, otherwise you can't do this encounter. And no one in your guild is playing monk because they just so happen to be shit at the moment.
Yeah, I do get what you're saying.
That's one annoying thing about class-specific mechanics, but also I don't think it's necessarily... It feels like you'd almost have to design a boss around the idea of doing it.
Maybe so, yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of maybe having groups of classes that can only perform certain roles. Let's just say there's a big gap and you need to jump... You need a certain amount of players to jump from one side to another. So you have your hunters that they can disengage, your demon hunters can double jump and dash, mages can maybe blink the gap, or you can use warlock gates to let more people across. But I wouldn't say that's like a class-specific mechanic necessarily. It's just stuff that some classes can do that others can't.
Yeah, maybe that's a better way of doing it. The thing is because...
But that's just normal boss design.
Because we're like, you know... Well, I guess it is.
That is just normal boss design. It's like how some classes can just use immunity on some things to remove it.
Well, the thing is that I was just about to recommend, well, maybe make it so these class-specific mechanics are just certain classes are really good at doing the job, but that's already in the fucking game.
Yeah, that already exists.
Like, as an example, Zul'Horak, when you get the black holes, you just lob a rogue in there because you cheat deaths it, or you can put a warlock in there.
Or you can put your entire raid in there. But if you have rogues, you don't need to.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a beneficial thing to bring a rogue.
Yeah.
It's very similar. Like, there's always benefits to loads of different classes. Like, Death Knights were very, very good this tier for
Mass
Zul'Horak
scripts.
and Manaroth for the mass script. So,
Which I guess is a class-specific mechanic.
yeah, I guess
Because if you didn't have the Death Knights to deal with it, it was 10 times harder.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, it just seems that there's probably is really cool, engaging ways of doing it, but Blizzard, it really doesn't feel like they've shown us that with Mythic.
Yeah.
There probably is some really cool things that you can do. Someone is probably going to write in the comment the best mechanic that we've ever seen about this class. Like, druids are going to do a backflippy travel form into a aqua ball. I know. You know, they're going to do all this crazy shit, and it's going to be really cool. And I'll read it. I'll be like, that's a really good class-specific mechanic. But just because we haven't seen any, it seems like, I don't know, maybe that point is a bit like null at the moment.
But I also don't feel like we need it.
I don't
completely changed my mind. I mean, like I said, when we were talking about this in the first place, we were sold on this. Like, it was like really appealing. But now thinking about it, I don't want to see it at all. I think the raids are perfectly fine without having to almost force this shit on you. It's not necessary.
Yeah, maybe it might take things away. Like, it might make it so...
It could actually make the fights worse.
Yeah, exactly.
And it can make it frustrating for guilds that don't necessarily have those classes available. Or if those classes are just flat out shit at that time.
Yeah, because that's a good thing. Say that, like, it is a thing that a monk has to do, like, as you said, but monks happen to be absolutely terrible at the time. Like, do you change the boss, or do you make it so monks are good, or what? Like, yeah... Class-specific mechanics, they definitely have a lot of potential, and I think they could be amazing, but I don't really think that they're necessary anymore. Like, the boss design from this expansion, at least in my opinion, has been really, really, really strong. So, and the only fight that they did put it in, it felt like it was an experimental fight, Blast Furnace. It felt very similar to stuff like Dark Animus, which was a bit weird, or Spine of Deathwing, which was also like an odd fight. They're not necessarily bad fights, although I hate both of those fights. But, you know, they're just weird fights, and it feels that that's what they've just done. They tried it out, and I don't think, personally, it was very successful. And most priests I've talked to just don't like it either, because it's just boring to do.
Yeah, well, all the priests we progressed it with are just like, fuck this.
Yeah.
So with those two aspects covered, what is the best raid size? Because... as long as it's not flexible and there is a set raid size, surely it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if it's 15, doesn't matter if it's 20, doesn't matter if it's 40, it could be anything, right?
You're not wrong, I mean,
I'm putting that statement out there. I don't necessarily think that. But...
well, the thing, I've got two answers of what the best raid size is, and one of them is with my heart, and one of them is with my head. Yeah. My heart, of course, wants it to be 10-man, because I've always played in smaller raid guilds, and it's something very homely about 10-man guild. Yeah. You know, it's very tight-knit. Not saying that you can't have a 20-man guild where you're not tight-knit. I'd say
it's
that
just
the
different.
guild that we're in is very tight-knit as well.
I mean, I love the guild we're in, and I actually thoroughly enjoy everyone who plays in the guild.
Yeah.
We all get on like fucking house on fire.
But it's something about 10-man.
It's something about 10-man.
It's really, really nice. But logically speaking, I think that having more people in the raid allows Blizzard to make fights that are more complicated. Like, take Mythic Blackhand for an example. That's a fight that is incredibly complicated, especially Phase 2, where literally everyone in the raid group had their own, like, individual jobs, where, like, 3 people had to go do this, 3 people had to go on the balconies, 1 person had to kite, but then another person had to kite a different thing, and then you had the 2 tanks doing loads of crazy different movements, while, like, people had to go and, like, soak... It's just all over the place.
Everyone had a job apart from, like, 3 people.
I think 3 people, but
unless
even
you did the cheese strat.
Unless you did the cheese strat, in which case no one had any fucking jobs. And then the fight was shit.
Yeah, that's true.
So... like, even those 3 people that didn't have a job, they still had quite a lot to react to, and it was good enough, you know?
Yeah.
So, would you be able to make a fight as complicated and, I would say, as fulfilling as Mythic Blackhand with 10 people in it instead? Would they be able to throw as much shit at you, you know?
That's what I totally agree with you, and the answer is no, I don't think... I think the fight would be worse if they scaled it for 10 people, because... you'd all maybe have the same responsibility, but the fight would end up losing something.
I think
it feels like the more players you can have in a raid, the more creative and the more crazy shit they can actually do with the raid. But on the other hand, when it comes down to some of the more simplistic fights, it feels like in a 10-man group, you have more responsibility per player than what you do in, say, a 25-man group. And I can't necessarily give a fantastic example of this. This is just sort of like something that I personally feel, and really it's just like how the scaling of the game was back then. But it always felt like in 10-man, you were more likely to have to deal with something in comparison to 25-man. It's like I said, especially on the earlier bosses where there's not much going on and there isn't a crazy amount of mechanics to deal with. Whereas in 10-man, it felt like you were more likely to be targeted by that debuff, more likely to have to deal with that certain ability in one way or another, which felt like there was more personal play going on. And also because you're in a smaller group and you need more communication between the smaller group, you sort of become closer as a group of friends.
You could say as well, if you die on 10-man, it's pretty much
Oh yeah,
fucked
I
as
mean,
well,
that's a
so
great example. I mean, if you did die in a 10-man, it was a wipe.
It's 10% of your group.
Because
gone.
everyone in your group is important. Whereas on 25-man, if one person died, but it's not a massive deal.
Yeah. I'm not too sure that I honestly think that although 10-man does have these benefits, I honestly think that the more people that are there, the more shit Blizzard could throw at you because there's more people to catch it.
Yeah, I know, I totally agree with you. I honestly think that, larger raid sizes are definitely better than smaller ones when it comes down to how complex and how interesting boss fights can be.
And I think it does go up to a cap. And I honestly think that 20 is a perfect size because we haven't really spoken too much about how this, it was going to cause a massive rumble, and it really did, especially in 10-man guilds.
Oh yeah, every 10-man guild was upset.
Yeah, because these 10-man guilds now suddenly had to adapt. Like, I'm talking about the hardcore ones, so the ones that were doing Heroic back then, which would now be called Mythic. So the Mythic 10-man guilds, they had to adapt, because in order to continue doing the hardest content in the game, they couldn't be their little family anymore. They needed to get a little bit bigger. And most of the time, they just merged. They'll find another 10-man guild and they'll just merge together.
And mergers typically never go well.
Yeah, some of them do, but it's very likely that, of course, there's conflicts all over the place and it can go very, very wrong. Or they'd have to, mass recruit as many people as they can getting in, and it can, ruin the vibe of the group. So 10-man was a little bit effective, but there are success stories. Yeah, there's quite a few people that, their guilds did, fucking die. And if they had been with those guilds for a long time, then it must have sucked. Because they're I was so happy just doing 10-man. Yeah, 10-man and 25-man, they weren't always the same, but at least I got to play with the people that I like to play with in the hardest content. But to be honest, it's kind of got to a point where it's just well, you got to suck it up. This is just how the game's going to change from now on. I think that the pros of having fights that come out and they're all very well tuned, at least in my opinion, the majority of them are very well tuned, regardless if they're good mechanics or not, which I think they are, but it doesn't matter if you think they're good mechanics or not, they are well tuned.
Yeah. And that outweighs the need for 10-man.
And that outweighs the need for
two different raid sizes.
Yeah, the disruptive nature of the transition. The transition's done now, and I think it was worth it, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
Some people probably won't because they won't be raiding anymore. And that's fair enough. It's just a personal opinion.
But I'm going to put this to you now. If there was a shiny button in front of you that said 10-man only Mythic, you would press it.
I probably would, but that'll be my heart speaking.
It's the wrong decision.
It is the wrong decision.
But I would press it as well.
Yeah, probably the thing is there'll probably be in an alternate universe. There'll be us two speaking and going. But if there was a 25-man button, for Mythic, then you'd push it. And
exactly, yeah.
It's literally a personal thing. But I honestly think that Mythic has done an exceptionally good job. I'm actually very surprised. It probably helps that the boss quality was very, very good as well.
This entire expansion, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, there's a couple of bosses with
really fucking terrible bosses.
Yeah.
But I'd say the majority of the bosses were really good, really well tuned. Class-specific mechanics didn't actually turn up, but I don't think it was necessary. And if they ever do it again, hopefully it's in a very non-shit way. I was trying to think of a clever word, but no, just don't do it bad. It's like Blast Furnace's version. It was a cool idea, but the mob was just really fucking boring to use. Yeah. So give us something fun to play with if you are going to do class-specific mechanics, but hopefully they don't just jam it in to make it so, but there's class-specific mechanics.
They shouldn't be there just as a selling point.
Yeah, exactly. They should be there because it makes sense in the fight and it adds to the fight.
Exactly.
So yeah, overall, Mythic, pretty fucking good. And Flex was pretty fucking good as well. Raiding generally, this expansion has been really good. And looking into Legion with all the bosses, although PTR isn't a particularly good way of like seeing if the bosses are any good or not, because they're always a little bit strange and buggy, you don't get to spend a lot of time with them, it definitely looks like the Raiding X expansion is going to be roughly on par with Warlords at least.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
And we did speak about that on the stream. One thing we did say about the Legion raiding is that there doesn't seem to be any super flashy bosses.
Yeah, nothing seams super.
To go completely off topic.
Yeah, that's fine. But nothing seems to be super outstanding.
I mean, in Warlords, there's so many there's not loads of bosses, but there are some bosses that stand out. Like Thogar, Hans and Franz, basically any bosses that have any major environmental effects, and you just think, holy shit, that's awesome. Pretty much only had that with Star Augur. And that wasn't even an environmental effect.
That was just the
necessarily. It's
background
just the
looking nice.
background looks fucking
you
awesome.
Gotta, like, the thing is, I really can't take my opinions on PTR very well, because when I first played against Gorefiend, I actually didn't like him, and now he's one of my favourite bosses. Like, once you fuck about with the boss a little longer and you actually get to, actually fight them, that's when you can get a really good...
It's when you get timings
sort of
and rhythms down, and you're like, actually, I really like this fight.
The flow of the fight. But yeah, you're right, there maybe isn't as much, like, gimmicky stuff, and I'm not saying gimmicky in a horrible way. Like, those fights with the fucking trains and everything, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But maybe there isn't as many, like, giant gimmicky fights coming next expansion. Hopefully that doesn't make them boring. We'll have to see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited regardless.
It should be good. Hopefully it'll be good. Otherwise I'll be very sad.
But that's all we're going to talk about this week. Again, just as a quick reminder, we are going to Gamescom. If you're there and we're not streaming and we're walking around and we look sad and lonely, come and pick us up, take us to the bar, get us a drink.
Is that it? Don't say hi, just get us alcohol. That's all it is. And of course, do remember to tune into the streams from the 17th to the 21st of August on our channel, on Fatboss TV, on Twitch. We are planning on doing some cool-ass events, so hopefully you'll enjoy it.
We'll be doing live updates as well the entire time we're there on Twitter and shit like that, so go follow us on Twitter.
Yeah. And
might do it on Facebook as well, but we don't really like Facebook.
Yeah, Twitter's better, in my opinion.
Twitter's better. So be on there.
So yeah, either way, thank you very much for watching, guys, and we will see you next time.
Catch you later.